بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن.
A patient was shifted to our hospital after being treated in multiple hospitals. Aged around 55 to 60. This man was very thin and weak. In medical terms, we term this condition as bone and skin, where the patient has an inadequate percentage of water in his body. There was a girl by his side, aged around 20 to 25, who called herself that old man's wife. My junior doctors told me about this patient's condition, and how he had had chronic diarrhea for the past 4 months. He couldn't eat anything. The doctors had conducted all the tests they possibly could, including gastroscopy, endoscopy, biopsy, and every single one of them was inconclusive. His condition worsened day by day, as no medication seemed to be treating his condition. He was then shifted to ventilation in the ICU. One of his previous doctors sarcastically commented, "Why don't you make him listen Surah Rahman, 51st chapter of the Holy Quran for spiritual therapy?" The reason he commented that because nothing is obvious with the test reports, what's been really happening to him since past 4 months. The junior doctors took the old man's medical history, and told me that he didn't have diabetes or any similar disease. So I told them to get him tested for AIDS. The doctors told me that last year he had a very similar condition of diarrhea when he got tested for AIDS in Mayo Hospital. The test came out to be negative, and he got better in the next 3 to 4 months. This year, however, his condition was way worse. He was lying unconscious on the ventilator. I still insisted to get him tested for AIDS. The doctors in our hospital make sure that the recitation of the Quran, mainly Surah Rahman, keeps on playing by the patient's beds at least once a day for spiritual therapy. On the 3rd day in our hospital, one of the junior doctors called me up and said that he has noticed that every time we play the recitation of Surah Rahman, we see numerous maggots emerging from his oral and nasal cavities. The pipes that were inserted in his nose for breathing, and one in the mouth directed to the stomach, were all filled with many tiny maggots, which you can see in the video. A machine called sucker is normally used to extract any phlegm mucus accumulated in the patient's throat via negative pressure. However, the doctors couldn't explain where these maggots were coming from. They checked the stomach as well as the nasal cavity, but everything was clear. The nurses said that these maggots stopped emerging as soon as they paused the recitation of Surah Rahman. There are several cavities in our bones known as sinus, so I suggested that these maggots might be coming from there. We've seen patients in the last stages of diabetes, where their wounds become so infected, we notice the appearance of such maggots. But this man's condition was very unusual, as he didn't even have diabetes. I told the doctors to get his AIDS results back while we treat him with other antibiotics. I suggested that the patient's immune system might be suppressed, which would explain the appearance of these maggots. The patient had no family member visiting him, and the girl, his wife, did not bring any medicines, so we started his treatment by the hospital's funds. The emergence of maggots from his nose, mouth, and now even his eyes continued as soon as we started the recitation of Surah Rahman. After which the doctors and even his wife told us to stop playing it. One of the Christian nurses told them that she didn't know what was wrong with the patient, but what she did know was that every time we played this Quranic prayer, these maggots started leaving the patient's body. She believed that if we keep on playing the prayer, the patient would start healing faster. I told the doctors to tell the wife to either get the patient's test results herself, or to give us the receipt so that we could get them. One of the nurses had counseled the patient's wife, telling her that her husband might have AIDS, which might be affecting the immune response in his body and causing the emergence of maggots. The wife got scared and told the nurses that she wanted to talk to the doctor in charge. It has been over a year since this incident occurred. And after a lot of thought, I've decided to narrate this incident to other people. At that time, she told me a very horrific story. She was afraid that if her husband tested positive for AIDS, she was very likely to have contracted it from him. She came to my room and told me in person that her husband is a magician. I asked her why she had lied about her husband being a taxi driver then. So she said that he does drive a taxi, but he also practices black magic using the Quran. I laughed because I knew it wasn't possible to do magic via Quran, which made her fall into the man's trap by committing this hideous act. After that, he used to tell them to perform ablution, and used to recite multiple verses from different chapters from the Quran, and mixing them up. After 1 to 2 sessions, he didn't used to charge anything. But people who used to be really desperate used to still come to him after that, which is when they were told about the money and risk involved. But he used to assure them that their work would be done. He used to force young guys and girls to fornicate with him and then eat his waste. After that, he used to give them verses in Arabic and used to tell them to recite them before mixing something in their husband/wife's food. The woman did as he had told her to. Now such a woman who has committed adultery, her marriage is not only invalidated but also, this transgression has forced her out of the bounds of Islam. After this, she said, she saw no change in her husband. Instead, he started beating her up. But what did change was that she started getting tempted to come to this magician every day. She was then tempted to get a divorce and get married to this man, the magician. She ran from there without telling them and lived with this man for 6 months, after which she got involved in his work. The man did their wedding ritual by the Quran and said that their willingness to marry is enough for this marriage to be valid, even though she still hadn't gotten a divorce from her previous husband. Few months later, the man got chronic diarrhea and he was admitted to Mayo Hospital, Lahore. After 4 months of suffering, he realized that what he was doing was wrong, and asked God for forgiveness. He told his wife that from then onwards he will leave all this work behind, and will only focus on driving his taxi. He asked his so-called wife if she could survive with him with that income. He told her that their marriage was invalid and that she should go back to her ex-husband and ask him for a divorce and ask God for forgiveness. She did as he told her to and went back to her ex-husband, who got furious after seeing her. He beat her up and told her that he had already divorced her and did not want to see her anymore. When she came back to the man 2 days later, the doctors of Mayo Hospital were amazed to see his condition. Docs gave him some medicines and his condition got a lot more better, and thus he was discharged. After that, they went to a local mosque and did a formal wedding ceremony. The man continued to drive his taxi. For 6 months, he worked hard driving his rickshaw taxi and earned enough to get the daily bread. They were leading a very peaceful life. He left that world of black magic. But the world is so cruel. He was again emotionally got blackmailed into it. One day, a very beautiful girl came crying to that man, and told him her problems, and the man started his past work once again without thinking twice. She kept telling him, but he was blinded by all the money he was getting. And now, 4 months later, he has the same condition, worse than before, and he's lying unconscious in this hospital. The woman said that she wants to ask God for forgiveness and wanted no part in whatever her husband was doing. I have censored and summarized this incident before putting it in public. She asked me about the appearance of maggots, and I explained her, without going into much detail, that they might have been emerging from his sinus due to lack of blood and other germs infecting his body. After narrating this incident, she took out the reports for HIV that she had obtained from the lab. She told me that she was scared that she might have contracted it too. She asked if she should also listen to Surah Rahman, 51st chapter of the Quran, and I told her why not. The man stayed alive for one more day, and every time we played the recitation of Surah Rahman, we saw maggots simmering out from his mouth and nose. This didn't stop. In the end, his own wife wasn't ready to take his dead body. We told her that he wasn't the hospital's responsibility. God knows what would have happened with them. It has been quite a few years now. Remember that a Muslim is not allowed to practice black magic. If he or she does learn to do it somehow, then he isn't a Muslim anymore. People misuse the Quran intentionally or unintentionally, sometimes by using it while not being pure. God says in the Quran that there is blessing and recovery in the Quran for the believers and loss for the tyrants. Whoever is cruel to himself is also a tyrant. It is not permissible for a Muslim to practice any kind of magic or to get it done from someone else. And whoever does it is out of the bounds of Islam. When you're practicing black magic, you're committing blasphemy, because you're trying to do God's work, using illegal means, especially by using the Quran just to get your desired results. Few days ago, when I got a call from a girl in America, I made her recite the creed again. Because when she came here, she didn't know much about this and got involved in doing black magic, which put her out of the bounds of Islam. She used to have a lot of fights with her husband. If at any point in life, you've been involved in anything similar, so ask God for forgiveness, perform ablution, and recite the creed and be firm with whatever God has written for you. Secondly, if anyone thinks that someone might have casted magic on them, then they shouldn't go running to any third person. Everyone is quick to say that magic is real and it was done on the Prophet Muhammad too by the magicians of his time. But what we need to understand is that Prophet Muhammad also blessed us with guidelines to counter it. He told us to recite chapter 113 and 114 of the Quran. Black magic doesn't affect a believer except the will of God, and I often quote these verses from Quran, chapter 3, verses 84 to 89, where God says, "Say, in whose hand is the realm of all things, and he protects while none can protect against him, if you should know?" They will say, "All belongs to God." Say, "Then how are you deluded?" Most of it is just a thought in our brain. The majority of people are mere psych patients. The main root of this problem is basically our hatred for each other. We have so much hatred, enviousness, jealousy, despoilment, and greed within ourselves, that often has an effect on the lives of others. Even a mother looking at her child with love without mentioning the name of God, can result in the evil eye. Whenever your focus shifts from the Creator to His creation, without His reference, it's not going to end well. Use God's reference and praise God's name while looking at your child, then your child is in the protection of God. Some of my junior doctors love me so much they compare me God forbid. I strictly tell them not to, because this is blasphemy and disbelief in the oneness of God. Sometimes when people get out of a big problem and they're not in their senses, they often end up saying something like this. But saying it in one's senses is pure disbelief in the power of God. And God does not tolerate this. Every time a child does something inappropriate, the mother is always there to scold him. Similarly, when a man chooses to go out of the bounds of his law, God teaches him a lesson. The verse of the throne, chapter 02, verse 255 in the Quran, is a reflection of God's sovereignty. Whenever a Muslim is in fear, he recites this verse thinking that it would protect him. When Arabs used to recite it, they knew what it meant and how this verse praised the might of God. They knew that it wasn't just the power of the throne, but in fact it was the power of the one established himself on that throne. And whenever our focus shifts from the Creator to anyone or anything else, then we are amongst the wrongdoers.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن